Welcome. Thank you for being here. I know it's been a long signal and this is the last session of the day and you're probably all excited to go and have a drink after this, so I'm very happy that you could join. I am David Lowe, so I'm a Principal Solutions here at Twilio, and I wondered, did any of you guys catch the IVR demo that I did earlier in a previous talk? Anyone in this room? A few. Awesome. Very good. So you guys are probably saying this guy builds awesome demos. Or you might be saying, why is this guy talking about call tracking now? He built a demo on IVRs. The reason that I'm here talking about call tracking is because in a previous life I actually worked in marketing. Back in Australia some years ago I owned an advertising agency, and we ran search marketing campaigns for our customers, hundreds of local Australian businesses. And one of the things that we offered our customers, surprise, surprise, is call tracking. So I'm really passionate about this subject. I have seen firsthand how call tracking has made an impact to business growth and business revenue. So it's something that I like talking about. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, one, why call tracking? So why is it important to start thinking about measuring calls in 2019? And also, what does the current state of play look like for call tracking this year? We'll talk about some basics, things like DNI and UTM parameters and call attribution, and these are some things that you might or might not have heard of. If not, that's fine. We'll go into detail about all of those things today. And then we're going to dig into some of the info and specifically talk about how you can build call tracking on Twilio using a crawl, walk, and run approach. And that's going to involve a special guest today, my friend, and I'm really excited actually to announce that Josiah from Scorpion Marketing will be helping me on stage demonstrate and show today a really sophisticated application of call tracking using Scorpion Marketing's applications. So why call tracking? Well, here's the data. Paid advertising is rising. It's growing really fast at around about 18% year over year, and it's been going on at that rate since 2014. This year we expect to see around about 162 billion calls from search and social and display ads in the US, and there's really no indication that things are going to slow down. So many marketers today, they're looking for the new kind of sexy form of advertising, right? Thinking things like push ads and pop-ups, thinking that call tracking is last era's advertising, but it's not. A lot of calls originate from ads, and it's really important that marketers understand the performance of their advertising through calls so they can double down on those ads that are working and also perhaps re-strategize on those ads that aren't. But it's not easy. You know, there's a lot of levels of complexity to call tracking. You need to know how many numbers you're going to buy if you're running multiple campaigns over multiple platforms, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn. How are you attributing those leads? Is that based on those ad platforms? Is it based on the campaign, or perhaps it's based on the content inside of the ad itself? How do you get that data? How do you store that data? And perhaps the best question to ask is, where do I place the actual phone number? Is it on the ad, like what RAM have done in this illustration, or perhaps it might be on your webpage? So we're going to solve this today gradually using our crawl, walk, run approach, and we're going to look at 3 different implementations of how to build this on Twilio, starting with really very little code and kind of manual input inside the Twilio environment. And then we'll look at programmatically setting up call tracking using Twilio's suite of APIs. And lastly, we'll look at some advanced functionality, things like number pooling and different attribution methods. And Josiah will get us going and revved up and kind of set the scene for what you can do when you actually expose data through a UI, as Scorpion Marketing have done. But before we do that, we need to understand some of the fundamentals. So this might be the most obvious thing that you'll hear at Signal today, but call tracking doesn't work without a phone number. You need an IP phone number in order to set up call tracking. Some of you are laughing, but some people don't realize this. So most people associate call tracking with SEO and with PPC and with these big ad platforms, but you can actually place a phone number anywhere. Any medium, any platform, any website, anywhere that allows you to publish a phone number, you can set up call tracking. So it doesn't have to be these tier 1 ad platforms, the Googles, LinkedIn's, Facebook's. You can place call tracking phone numbers on digital radio platforms like Spotify or digital TV platforms like Netflix, and it doesn't have to be digital. You know, billboards sometimes still work too. So really anywhere where you can place a phone number, you can set up call tracking. But as well as placing numbers on ads, you can also dynamically insert phone numbers onto your web page too. So you do this by manipulating the DOM and instructing the web page to look out for specific attributes so it can insert the right call tracking number onto that web page. So it looks something like what you've just seen there if you were looking at the slides, but it also looks something like this. So our Mart is my favourite place to shop. Our Mart is our Mart sells electronics, so TVs and radios and surround sound systems and things like that, and I frequent this website often. In fact, I visited two weeks ago and I noticed that our Mart, for whatever reason, likes to advertise their phone number in really big, red, bold font so it stands out. And because I live in Austin, Texas, it's given me a local 512 number. Funnily enough, I go to search for an LCD television, and I do this through Google, right? I don't go directly to our Mart just because I want to see what else is out there. But our Mart's website comes up in the first section of the Google AdWords section in the search results page. So I click on that because I know our Mart, and all of a sudden all of these things change, right? Firstly, the phone number's changed. It's no longer an Austin, Texas telephone number, it's now a San Francisco phone number, starting with 415. And then the URL string's changed also. There's some funky stuff going on there. You know, it's a big long string. So if you're measuring the performance of your advertising, you're going to need to know what those things are. They're called UTM codes. So they're simple codes or parameters that you can attach to a custom URL in order to track your advertising. And there are different types of UTM parameters. There's probably too many to mention today, but there are three main types, three common types of UTM codes that advertisers use today. One is UTM source. That's going to track where the traffic is coming from. In the example here, it's Google, but it could also be something like a newsletter. UTM medium tracks the type of traffic or which kind of tool you use to get the traffic. So we're saying paid search here, it could be something like Google AdWords, or it could be something else like email. And then UTM campaign tracks the actual advertising campaign that you got your traffic from. So when I did my search for a television in Google, clearly I can see here that our Mart were running a campaign for electronics, and that led me to their webpage. But you may not just want to measure calls to your ads. You might want to also track what users are doing in their session on your website. And in order to do this, you must give them a web cookie or use local storage. So cookies are labels that describe useful information about users that visit your web page. They should be unique. They should contain an ID. And that ID should be used by your platform. So your platform knows how to insert the right call tracking number. Now there's a lot of use cases for web cookies, and I'm not going to go into the details, but I think it's pretty clear that if you're giving a call tracking phone number to every single person that visits your web page, that one-to-one mapping is just not scalable if you have millions of unique website visitors per week or per month or per year. And then we get into things like number pooling, some more sophisticated use cases, and we can discuss that a little bit later in the presentation when Josiah comes on stage. So now by defining UTM parameters or using web cookies or local storage, we have these different ways where we can start attributing phone calls. And that's what we need if we want to start measuring the performance of our advertising. And also, that's what we need as we begin to crawl and then walk and then run in building call tracking solutions on Twilio. So now that we know the fundamentals of call tracking, let's start to build this. So I'm going to give you all a demo in a second of how to build call tracking on Twilio, but I want to set the stage first. So a new business has just started to advertise. You've just purchased your very first ad and you want to start tracking the performance of that ad. So what do? Well, you go to Google. It's the most common ad platform. And you buy an ad and you want to start measuring calls. So we're going to do this today. And this is really the most basic form of, or the most basic implementation of call tracking that you can do. It's really attributing calls to one ad. So the attribution type here is ad level, although it could really be any level. We're not dynamically inserting a phone number onto a web page. We're specifically placing that phone number on the ad itself. But we're going to do this all inside the Twilio console and with just 3 lines of code. So I'm just going to get set up here on my local machine. All right, I trust we can all see that. So the first thing that I need to do is I need to buy a phone number from the Twilio console. Call tracking is not going to work without a phone number. The next thing that I need to do is I need to add that number to my advertising. Then I'll configure the number with a webhook which is pointing to a service that uses TWIML. TWIML is Twilio's XML markup language that allows us to basically do things with phone calls. And in this case, we're going to forward a phone call. And then I'll use that TWIML to forward the call from the call tracking number to this business's normal phone number. So how do I do that? Well, let's just go to Twilio's phone numbers. I'm already on the page, but I'll just refresh this just so we can all see the same thing. And then we buy a phone number. So it's as simple as clicking this button. We can search for a phone number. I'm going to search for a number in my local area code, an Austin phone number. And we'll see here that a number of phone numbers come up. We want one that's voice capable. They should all be. Let's buy this phone number. And that's it. So that's the first step. It's buying a phone number. But now we need to actually do something with this phone number. So what do? I go to a Twilio TWIML bin. It's going to host the code and the logic in order to forward this phone number. So I'm going to call this call tracking, and I'm going to write my 3 lines of code. I might get you to take note of that phone number, Josiah, and call that in a second. So we can see here it's a valid TWIML, so this code works. I'm going to create this Twilio TWIML bin, and I'm going to copy this URL here because I need this URL to attach that to the webhook in the phone number. Let's go back to my phone number. And when a call comes in, what we need to do here is I can either select a TWIML bin or I can just use the URL for that webhook. But let's just go and select TWIML bin. And I'm going to save that. Now, it worked as I take out my phone and Josiah goes to call the call tracking number. Hello?
How's it going?
So it's not loud enough, but it worked. So that is really the most basic implementation of setting up call tracking. 3 lines of code inside Twilio's own environment. So what did we just do? What did we do then? This is what we did, and let me walk through this with you. So as a customer, you're dialing the Twilio phone number. We've configured that with a webhook, use some TWIML, so we can forward that to a business listed number. And then the call is connected. It's pretty simple. It's as simple as that. Now that might not be scalable though. You know, as your business decides to grow and you're not advertising on just one platform anymore, you're advertising on multiple platforms, and perhaps also you've purchased multiple ads and you're looking at different attribution methods. You know, perhaps it's not as granular as just ad level attribution anymore. You want to actually start measuring calls based on the campaigns you're running. We need a more sophisticated setup. So note in this example, we're still not using dynamic number insertion, but we are going to use Twilio's APIs. In fact, we'll use 5 API calls to start programmatically setting this up on Twilio. And I'm going to show you how to do that now. So for those savvy software engineers, you can see some exposed credentials there. This project will be deleted at the end of this, so you won't be able to use those in case you're writing them down. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. Before we found a number in the Twilio console, this time we're going to find a number using a Twilio API. Then what we're going to do is we're going to buy that phone number again using a Twilio API. We'll also configure that phone number the same way that we configured it in the phone number page inside of a Twilio console by clicking that drop-down menu and clicking our TWIML bin. We'll do that using an API. There's some things that we're going to pretend that we're doing, right? Like programmatically adding a number to our ad. We can do that, but we're not going to do it for the sake of this presentation. We're going to stick within the Twilio infrastructure. And then lastly, what we're going to do is we're going to actually get the call data because we're talking about call tracking, right? There has to be some measurements. There has to be something that we're looking at. There has to be some analytics. So importantly, we're going to make another API request to our call resource and we're going to bring that data back. So this is a simple API request to find a list of phone numbers containing the area code 512. And if I run this request, there we go. It's given us a list of phone numbers with 512. It's pretty simple. What you do here within your own infrastructure is you'd listen out for events. So somebody hits my web page. I want to search for a list of local phone numbers. This is the very first step. This is exactly what you do in real time. Next, what we need to do is actually buy one of these phone numbers. So what's a phone number from this list? Let's take the very top one. Let's place that in here. Let's make sure it's the right format. And then let's run this request again. Can you guys see this? Awesome. Now it's given us this funky string which tells me that the number was purchased successfully. And I'll show you how, and I'll show you why. Because we need to configure this phone number now, right? So similarly, before how we configured this phone number in the Twilio console to a TWIML bin, we need to configure this to a service that we're hosting. This would be your application. We need to assign this number to your application. It's 3 lines of code. Now, this is my pseudo application, which is calltrackingtalk.com/update. And what I'm going to do is paste this phone number SID into this request, and this will configure my phone number with this URL. All right, so it's given me a phone number which tells me that that was successful. If you'd like to see, let's go into our phone numbers. We just purchase a new phone number with the URL calltrackingtalk.com. Now we're going to do some other things here, right? We want to make sure that this specific phone number is also assigned to your advertising. And I'll uncomment this, but I won't go through all of this because this is going to be very dependent on your application and probably less relevant to this actual code itself. But what you would be doing is you'd be finding a phone number, assigning that to a database record, and then making sure that number, which is assigned to the database record, is published somewhere on your advertising. And you can do that programmatically using both Twilio APIs and obviously some code here. Let's uncomment that and go to the very last thing, which is fetching the call data. And when you fetch call data, you get a number of attributes, right? And this is really important stuff because realistically, we're talking about call tracking. We need some measurements. We need to know what's going on. Every time a call is made, you should be making a request to Twilio's call resource to get some of this information. Things like how long the call went for, the actual phone numbers, the phone number that it was called from, and then also things like the price can be used for ROI calculations. So what do we do here? Let's go through it. So this time we bought a phone number programmatically using the Twilio phone number resource. We also set up that phone number programmatically using the Twilio number resource. Then the same things are going on, right? The phone call happens, the call gets connected, we're using the same TWIML, we're using the dial verb, and then after that, though, we're going a step further and we're making an additional request to our call resource to bring back some data, things like the phone number, the call duration, the call cost, and even the call recording if you want to record calls. But we're still talking kind of some reasonably basic stuff, you know. Call tracking is about UI. Call tracking is often about session level attribution. It's about making sure there's multiple phone numbers that we can assign per piece of advertising. It's about dynamically on the fly buying phone numbers. So as a business, we've scaled now, right? How do we manage these hundreds of ads with different attribution methods? Well, luckily, we have Josiah here today to help demonstrate how Scorpion have solved this problem and to illustrate the Scorpion UI and how call data is exposed through that UI. Thanks, Josiah.
Yeah. So before I move on to our next slides, I kind of want to talk about what's going to be happening. First of all, it is not a live demo. I did not trust that I could do this live. So you'll see some of our stuff kind of in a recorded session. But a lot of the stuff that you saw, those 3 lines of code that were instructions for TWIML, explaining to Twilio what to do with the incoming call, we're about to see some tools that are kind of an intermediary step that happens at that time. So when a call comes in, rather than hitting a TWIML bin that returns TWIML directly, it's going to hit one of our applications. Our application is going to do some logic, and it's going to return instructions to Twilio about what to do with that phone call. So it's going one step further than just passing the call along to the next destination. So you can see here a big UI. We've got a lot of settings here. We have some templates for phone numbers that we can direct these calls to. We have some websites, some projects, and some phone numbers. So in this, we're going to set up some new numbers. Is this video playing?
Press it again, I think.
Oh, there we go.
Yep.
Okay, so we're gonna add a new number to a campaign. Just for the sake of time, I already purchased a campaign. You can see we can add different types of phone numbers, and you'll see in just a moment when we add this phone number, a lot of these tools look very similar to what Twilio has, and that's because, again, we're doing APIs. Everything that is available to you in that console is available to you in your own environment, in your own interface. So we're going to add this to a campaign. We have this Facebook remarketing campaign we're going to add to. We have some other settings you can track more granularly. David talked about how you can track call tracking pretty much anywhere. And that is definitely something that we've explored. So we're going to go to my test site here. You can see we have a phone number that is just part of the site. But we have that campaign that we added, right? So I have another page pulled up, which you can see we've navigated to. And you can see those same UTM codes like David showed earlier, and that's going to associate to that campaign that we have. So this is where it really all comes together. Oops. Oh, no. Now we've got to go through all that again? Well, I'll talk for a little bit here. Call tracking is not about just directing calls. It's about doing something with that information. Why is this thing frustrating? OK, well, I think we're going to scrap this and just talk for a little bit. So with a user interface, what we're doing now is we're taking that information. We can set up 100 campaigns. We can set up 100 phone numbers, and they can all point to the same place. And that's great technologically, but that does effectively nothing. All you're doing is getting calls. The real value of call tracking is when we can see the health of our campaigns, when we can see immediately how things are performing, and we can pivot dynamically. Things as small and fast as on weekends we're not seeing quality, but on weekdays we are. We can see that happening live. We can pivot immediately, and that is what really helps us stay ahead of the curve. And like David said, this is a thriving source for leads and for calls. It's not something that you can afford to kind of just push aside, and we think that iterating on this and really being on the leading edge of this is really critical. So as much as we didn't get to see the pretty end there, that's effectively a little bit of dynamic number insertion. That's campaign level tracking. But David did mention another step, which is that number pooling and that session level tracking. That is where we started to see a lot of very powerful tools. And of course, there's some trade-offs. It tends to be more expensive. You are buying a lot of numbers. You are dealing with a lot of calls to different APIs and things. But we had a very good example of why someone might do this. We had a client that had very low call volume on weekends. But on Mondays, they would be slammed. And they noticed that their campaigns were performing poorly. And we started to see some correlations there. So what we did is we spun up some number pooling, and we associated sessions. We would give cookies to the guests on the page, and we would resurface that same phone number to those guests holding those cookies when they came back. And what we saw was that most of those calls that were coming in on Monday that looked like organic traffic, that looked like they were just showing up all of a sudden, they were actually paid leads that were coming in on the weekends, but nobody wants to call it Sunday at 7 p.m. They do some research, they're on their phone maybe, they find what they're looking for, and they say, I'll call tomorrow. And so number tracking and getting down to the sessions and really exploring where you need to track your leads is as much a part of it as any technical solution that you can bring to this problem to try and solve the issues of managing your campaigns.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Josiah. And we'll both be around for a little bit after this presentation if you have questions on dynamic number insertion or different levels of attribution or phone number pooling. But I want to recap quickly. So what have we learned today? One, call tracking can be complex, right? It can be. But Twilio makes it easy, and you can set up call tracking realistically within a couple of minutes inside of the Twilio console. You can programmatically set up call tracking using only a few API calls, and you can listen for these events in your own infrastructure. But then at scale, you can start looking at all these different attribution methods, and there are some companies such as Scorpion Marketing that have built some really sophisticated applications on top of Twilio APIs that tackle some of these large-scale call tracking problems. So as I said, Josiah and I will be around for a little bit after this, so if you have questions and want to reach out or have any questions pertaining to call tracking, feel free to ask. But again, thank you very much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your signal.